Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All in time for Christmas. That and a new law that's supposed to protect us from terrorism, but will it do the job? We'll be exploring these issues today on The Briefing, after the headlines.
Thanks, Tom. Well, a very good morning. It's 9:30. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Thousands of nurses are striking for the second time in under a week. Staff in England, Northern Ireland and Wales have walked off the job in a dispute over pay. The Royal College of Nursing has warned the action could go on for 6 months unless an agreement can be reached. The union's calling for a 5% above inflation pay rise, but the government says its demands are unaffordable. Today's action by the nurses comes ahead of a strike by ambulance workers tomorrow. Thousands of paramedics, technicians and other staff are due to walk out. The Health and Social Care Minister, Will Quince, says serious call-outs must be covered.
My message to the unions is clear. These strikes are unjustifiable and unnecessary. The government accepted the pay review body's recommendations in full. If strikes are to go ahead, then it's important that patient safety is the priority for the unions as it is for the government. And that's got to be ensuring that the most serious call-outs for ambulances, so Cat 1 and Cat 2, for example, are covered on strike day.
Rishi Sunak will face questions from senior MPs for the first time as Prime Minister today. Appearing before the Commons Liaison Committee, including Foreign Affairs, European Security and Home Affairs, he'll be scrutinised on topics like the cost of living, migration and the war in Ukraine. The last time a Prime Minister faced the committee, chaired by Tory MP Sir Bernard Jenkin, it was Boris Johnson who resigned as Conservative leader the following day. The former film producer Harvey Weinstein's been found guilty of rape and 2 counts of sexual assault at a trial in Los Angeles. The jury acquitted the 70-year-old of charges relating to a second alleged victim, and a mistrial was declared on other allegations. Weinstein's already serving a 23-year prison sentence after being convicted of sexual misconduct in 2020. The committee investigating the 6th of January Capitol Hill riots has referred Donald Trump for prosecution. It said the former president should be charged with 4 crimes, including conspiracy to defraud the US and insurrection. The Justice Department will now decide and could press criminal charges. Mr. Trump's dismissed the investigations. He says they're politically motivated. The Bank of England has unveiled a set of banknotes that now feature King Charles III. The King's portrait will appear on existing designs on all 4 notes from £5 to £50. The royal household says new notes will only be printed to replace those that are worn out and to meet demand. That will minimise environmental and the financial impact. They're expected to be in circulation by mid-2024. Banknotes featuring a picture of the late Queen remain legal tender and can be spent as normal. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to the briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. First today, 10,000 NHS nurses will walk out for the second time in less than a week in a protest over pay. This comes as the government prepares for last-ditch talks with health unions to stop ambulance workers and paramedics from joining this wave of industrial action. Earlier, we spoke to the Minister of State for Health and Secondary Care, Will Quince. He said this.
My message to the unions is clear. These strikes are unjustifiable and unnecessary. The government accepted the pay review body's recommendations in full. If strikes are to go ahead, then it's important that patient safety is the priority for the unions as it is for the government. And that's got to be ensuring that the most serious call-outs for ambulances, so Cat 1 and Cat 2, for example, are covered on strike day.
Well, the Prime Minister said earlier this week that Number 10's 4% offer is both appropriate and fair. It is, after all, what the independent pay review body recommended. Well, the Royal College of Nursing, that trade union, disagrees. They're demanding a 19% increase in wages. It's a topic that will no doubt arise later today at the Prime Minister's debut at the Liaison Committee. This is the super committee of all the select committee chairs, questioning the Prime Minister in much greater detail than we see at Prime Minister's Questions. Well, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, joins me live from Westminster. And I suppose, Darren, these strikes will be pretty high up the agenda.
Yeah, indeed, and I think they will be at this cabinet meeting that's also taking place in Downing Street this morning, Tom. Clearly this is going to have a big impact on millions of people across the country. Ministers this morning, including Will Quince, trying to bat away suggestions that people will not be able to seek medical attention, effectively get an ambulance in an emergency in certain parts of the country later on this week. You know, if you have a heart attack or a stroke, can the government guarantee that there will be an ambulance there within any sort of time? Beg a couple of hours, they cannot. And that is why this clearly is a big, tricky political issue for the government. As you say, the Prime Minister is going to be at that liaison committee at 3 p.m. this afternoon. 14 committee chairs. You bet your bottom dollar, of course, strikes will definitely come up. Rishi Sunak, though, showing no sign that he's willing to compromise on all of this. The Nurses Union, for example, insist all they want to do is get round the table and talk about pay, and these strikes will be put on hold. The Prime Minister insisting, though, that the government is talking about pay in the sense that they've agreed already to the independent body's setting of pay, but ultimately they cannot look at some of these pay demands in the round because that would fuel, they would say, the very cause of what's all behind this inflation. It would make things worse. And it seems that the Prime Minister is digging his heels in, if you like, that he's prepared for these strikes to go on for months. Now, that is not to say, though, all Conservative MPs are on the same page on all of this. Some of them are particularly concerned about the political impact it may well have on the Conservatives' popularity, but also just the practical aspects of this, Tom. There's talk about drafting in the army to do certain things, but there have been lots of reports in the papers this morning saying that effectively the army cannot, for example, drive ambulances in the way that paramedics can. They can't necessarily turn on the blue lights. They cannot kind of break rules on the roads, etc., so that they are not going to really fulfil the role in the way necessary. And I think some Conservative MPs are getting slightly uneasy given the scale of this industrial action and the fact that there is no end in sight. In saying that, it's not going to be just strikes in front of this liaison committee. 14 committee chairs, ranging from everything from COP27 to the war in Ukraine, to the UK's place in the world, the cost of living crisis and the economy too. As you say, it is the first time Rishi Sunak would have appeared in front of the committee. Last time, it was Boris Johnson 6 months ago. He resigned the next day. I suspect today might be a little less dramatic.
Gosh, I remember that liaison committee appearance very well as the sort of architecture and infrastructure of Boris Johnson's administration was crumbling around him. He was sitting there talking about very mundane political issues. I suppose today will be a bit less mundane. Just finally, of course, the Prime Minister was in the Baltics yesterday. He was talking about the United Kingdom's contribution to the security of Northern Europe and pressuring other countries as well to remain steadfast in their commitment to Ukraine.
Yeah, this all comes from reports over the weekend saying that the government were going to look at Britain's contribution to the war in Ukraine, essentially kind of carry out a review of what they've spent so far, what they've contributed, what necessarily it may well have achieved. And that's led to some concerns that essentially the government is looking at the kind of cost-benefit analysis of all of this and may decide to row back in certain parts. And as you said, there are concerns within the Conservative Party. Lord Hague, for example, this morning insisting Britain must remain steadfast. But clearly lots of allies too in Europe, not least of all in the Baltics, where the Prime Minister was yesterday, in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. They are very concerned about any rowback. But the Prime Minister insistent that is not going to be the case. But it is something to watch, I think, in the months to come.
Seems to be a bit more of a bean counter than his predecessors. But yeah, one to keep an eye on. Darren, for now, thank you very much for joining us here on The Briefing. Let's get more on these strikes now. I'm joined from the picket lines in Northern Ireland by our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, who's in Belfast. Jack Carson we're going to go to in Birmingham rather than Doogie. Jack, thanks for joining us. You're at a picket line in Birmingham. These things are right across the United Kingdom. What are they saying?
Well, you know what, Tom? One word keeps coming up when I've been speaking to nurses here today, and that is retention. Retention of nurses when they've just graduated and going into nursing for the first time, and also retention of those older staff as they come up to retirement age. I spoke to one lady who's close to retirement. She's thinking, I'm starting to wonder what the point of carrying on is. I might as well just retire because I don't think the pay is fair enough. I don't think the support is good enough. And you can probably hear now they've just started more loud antics here as they're striking, but that word retention is the main thing here. Within retention comes fairer pay. Of course, we know that the RCN have put a pay offer towards the government of 5% above inflation. The government immediately kind of saying that wasn't good enough. But on top of pay, it's not just fair pay. A lot of these nurses do the job because they want to care for people and they like caring for patients. So with that comes safe staffing levels and making sure that wards are properly staffed so patients get the best care. And the other thing is agency workers, and they're saying that the government and the hospitals are kind of favouring paying agency workers when agency workers can get paid so much more money than normal nurses. So that word retention is the one that keeps coming up here in Birmingham.
Well, Jack, thank you for speaking over those quite noisy nurses behind you there in Birmingham. Let's now get the view from Doogie Beattie in Northern Ireland, who joins us from Belfast. Doogie, I hope that the picket line behind you is rather less noisy than the one in Birmingham. Doogie, what's going on here? The NHS has had tens of billions of pounds of extra funding in recent years, 40% extra funding in real terms compared to 2010-11. Where's all the money gone? Why are nurses so aggrieved?
Well, it doesn't seem to be filtering down to the shop floor, if you like. Here in Northern Ireland, we have 16 hospitals, 9 of them major, amongst 1.8 million people. There's more money here per capita into the health service than anywhere else in the UK. But as it's been said there in Birmingham, it is the working conditions, keeping nurses in those jobs, and of course, more importantly, making sure that there's fair pay between those that are in agency work and those that are actually employed by the National Health. Now, there's another question there. Some of the nurses that are employed by the National Health on, say, for instance, £16 an hour, can go and work for an agency 3 days a week for up to £50 an hour. And that is causing the costs of agency to rise. But in Northern Ireland, as so many other things, the assembly here sits and the seats are within so small a margins that MLAs or MPs do not want to make those decisions, not in my backyard. So therefore, what happens is we end up with loads of hospitals amongst a very small population, and resources to resource all those 16 hospitals just simply aren't here. So we end up with massive waiting lists, and then we have the problems with doctors' surgeries who can't see people. That's the same the whole way through the UK. You could wait 3 or 4 days for a doctor's appointment, and then you go to A&E, and the A&E then gets absolutely chock-a-block with people, and the nurses again get put under pressure. And it's this that they really need to address to make their working situation a lot better.
Absolutely remarkable inefficiencies in a health service that, of course, now has more funding, well, far more funding than the OECD average. And yet we're still getting outcomes like this. Extraordinary. Well, Doogie Beattie, thank you for joining us live from Belfast there, and before Jack Carson as well in Birmingham. Appreciate your time. Well, moving on to another issue now, something that's been rather less reported than the strikes. This week, the government has announced new legislation which they say is designed to increase venue preparedness for major security breaches like terror attacks. Under what's called Martin's Law, named after a victim of the Manchester Arena bombing, all venues with a potential capacity of 100 people or more will have to train their staff in terrorism preparedness. They'll also have to complete a terrorism preparedness plan. The government says it will establish inspection and enforcement regimes for these venues as well. So the question is this vital for public safety? or simply yet more onerous and ineffective red tape? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by John Oxley, a journalist and writer who's in the studio with me. And John, I suppose it's really clear there's been a big campaign behind this. People related to victims of terror attacks past have said that this is completely necessary. It's sort of clear why the government is going along with it.
Yes, absolutely. And first of all, you have every sympathy with people whose children or relatives were killed in an attack like this, and you can understand why you'd want to do it. But I think the issue for government and for lawmaking is quite often campaigns like this that are very, popular emotionally, then lead to a lack of scrutiny over what this will actually mean. And MPs and politicians are very happy to climb aboard these laws and endorse them, but they don't necessarily think about the impact it'll have on venues and on the wider industry that then has to deal with them.
I suppose it makes sense for a venue like the Manchester Arena to have a sort of a plan in place with regard to these sorts of things. But looking at the detail of this legislation, venues with capacity of up to 100 people as the sort of minimum, that would include most pubs, that would include churches. These are not rich organisations.
Absolutely. And if you look at the inquiry into the Manchester Arena bombing and the response to it, you see there's a lot there about how the MEN Arena did have a plan in place. The security contractors also had plans around terrorism awareness, but those didn't stand up on the night. But what you're doing is pushing this to smaller venues, as you say, often poorer organisations, community-run organisations, and it's just another burden on them. Either they have to pay someone to come and do it, or they kind of have to make it up themselves. There's the risk of scrutiny, and a lot, either it's a cost they can't bear, or it's an administrative burden that just makes running your local community centre a bit harder, annoys the volunteers, and they're less willing to do it.
It's worth exploring this particular point in greater detail. The Manchester Arena had a plan for issues like terrorism. They had a plan that this law might well mandate, and yet it still went horribly wrong.
Yes, so if you look into the report into the Manchester bombing and the aftermath, which was a big sort of judge-led inquiry, it looks at how the event staff were trained on terrorism, and it said that they did a reasonably good job of it, but perhaps it didn't have the urgency it might have had. And what you had is, security guards who were sort of paid minimum wage, basically, to make sure no one's causing trouble, understandably not intervening when they saw someone who's potentially a terrorist. They were afraid of being labelled as racist for calling out an Asian man with a backpack was one of the things. But also, you had massive statutory bodies. You look at some of the biggest criticisms in the report were for the fire brigade, the ambulance and the police service. There was no one person in charge of the emergency services response. The fire brigade had a period of about 90 minutes where no one knew who was in charge of the fire brigade response. Two of the police officers who were meant to be on duty took a 2-hour evening meal break and went for a 5-mile drive to go and get a kebab.
So this is failings within the emergency services rather than the venues in this specific case. But I suppose people are perhaps rightly very afraid of terrorism. It's something that is by its very nature terrorising. Is there not potentially an argument that there's a pro-business case for this red tape that says that if people think that venues have these sorts of plans in place, they're more likely to go out and spend their money, feel safer in society?
There is potentially that, but I think there's a great Mike Tyson line that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And this regime is going to come in, and we're going to have no idea whether these plans that sit in a folder somewhere are actually effective. And ultimately, the bulk of counter-terrorism relies on the police, the security services, and also this is a vanishingly rare threat. It is terrible and it's devastating when it happens, but there has been one bombing on this scale in the last 10 or 15 years since the 7/7 attacks. There have been a small number of other terror attacks, but it is so rare that I think most people, when they go out, it doesn't factor into their minds that much. And again, going back to the Manchester Inquiry report, one of the criticisms was people were not reacting as strongly as they could because we'd got used to the threat level being at severe. So it had become part of the part and parcel of the briefings for the staff. So it did sit on the back burner.
I suppose at the end of the day, in all of these conversations, we do need to remember you're more likely to be killed by your bath than you are by a terrorist in the United Kingdom, thankfully, at this stage. Really interesting stuff, though. Let's hope that MPs apply the same level of scrutiny that we've been applying in this conversation. John Oxley, thank you so much for joining us here on The Briefing. Just finally today, as Westminster winds down for the festive period, it's the last day that MPs sit on those green benches this year, many MPs are heading back to their constituencies, of course. With the soaring cost of living crisis and energy costs unaffordable for many, this Christmas may feel a little different than many before. Some MPs are personally spreading Christmas cheer, however, such as one member who spreads this cheer all year round, as well as in the lead up to Christmas. That's Caroline Harris.
Hello, my name is Caroline Harris. I'm the Member of Parliament for Swansea East. And today we're in the market in the middle of Swansea and we are launching the Everyone Deserves a Christmas campaign.
What a fantastic event here at Swansea Market to launch Everyone Deserves a Christmas. I mean, everybody's had a great time. It feels really Christmassy.
We've got fantastic entertainment. We've got Malpo, we've got Bronwyn, we've got the Valleys Rock Choir, we've got Steve Balsamo, and we've got the wonderful people of Swansea who will come today, not just to hear these guys singing, but to make a contribution to the Christmas hamper campaign.
Down his head, the stars in the bright sky, look down where he lay.
Although these are tough times, it's great to see people pulling together to raise money for their own communities, and to be a part of that, it's a real joy. So everyone deserves.
Well, really lovely to see. And joining me now to talk about her Everyone Deserves a Christmas campaign is the Swansea East MP and Deputy Leader of Welsh Labour, Caroline Harris. Caroline, how important is it to be sort of engaging with communities all year round? I suppose a lot of people think that MPs are only really at work when they're sitting on those green benches in Westminster, but there's so much more to the job.
Yeah, there is. I mean, the green bench is a very, very small part of the job. It's about helping people that you represent to make sure that they've got as easy a path as possible through life. And for some, it's very, very difficult.
So let's explore exactly what you're engaged in with this Christmas campaign. What exactly is it providing to your constituents?
Right, so it's all about people who are dependent on food banks. At Christmas, they can get food from the food bank, but it will be primarily what they would get the rest of the year. And a couple of years ago, we decided that if we could bring a bit of joy through some festive food, then we would do that. So we started off with 100 hampers in my living room, and that progressed to 200, then it became 300, then it became 500. We're touching 2,000 families now, where we provide, if not a cooked dinner or treats, because some people haven't got the facilities to cook. And for those who can, we provide them with as much fresh food in a Christmas hamper as we can. Things like a fresh chicken and veg and cheese and a box of Christmas crackers and sweets. And it's really lovely. It's lovely to be part of, but it's fantastic to see the faces on the families who receive these and the gratitude that people feel for the fact that those in their community are doing everything they can to help those who need a little bit of help.
Certainly, it's really, really good, especially at Christmas, to see that sort of community aspect coming together. How do people who might feel like they're in need of one of these parcels, how do they get in contact? How do they get involved?
Well, what we've done, this has become a bit of a fine art, Tom, if I'm honest. So we go through the schools, we go through the social services, we go through educational welfare officers, we go through our own casework. And this year we've gone not just Swansea, but Neath and Aberavon as well. We spread in the love. And then most MPs will have a case full of people they know deserve to have these hampers. But of course, the schools know a lot better. They are dealing with kids every day who may be coming in hungry. So, we are pretty sure that everybody who needs a hamper is going to be able to access one with the money that we've got. I mean, it gets more and more expensive. This year has been considerably more expensive, but we've not reduced the numbers. We've just had to up our game on fundraising. Actually, we've struggled to get some things, and we've had people out shopping for crackers for cheese and gravy mix over the last 24 hours. But we get in there. Yeah. So if you see a madman with a trolley full of gravy mix, you know he's with me. But it's a lovely feeling, Tom. It does make you feel good about life.
No, that is good, and it's nice to see those sort of community initiatives come together. While I have you, though, I do need to ask about these strikes that we're seeing today in Northern Ireland, in England, and indeed in Wales. It's only Scotland that has avoided these NHS strikes. And of course, it's your party, the Labour Party, that runs the NHS in Wales. Why are we seeing these strikes in Wales as well?
Well, in Wales, we get a budget from the UK government, and it's up to the Welsh government to actually portion that where they can, and they've invested in services. Unfortunately, it means that the money's not there to pay the nurses, which I'm sad about, obviously. And I will be going on a picket line to show my solidarity with the nurses today. I'm going to take them some festive cheer. I've got some chocolates for them. But the Welsh government have really made the best with what they've got. We need the UK government to give more money. I think the UK government really need to understand that the public are with the nurses, and they really need to start talking.
Well, of course, the NHS has had £30 billion more in the last couple of years, but I'm afraid we've come to the end of the programme there. We'll explore that, no doubt, later in the week as well. Thanks for joining us here on The Briefing. Up next is Bev Turner.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by 2 of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Very good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner Today on GB News. Thank you for joining me. Now, out on British streets today, thousands of nurses are staging a second day of strikes over pay. Their signs read, "Claps, don't pay the bills." We'll be crossing over to a picket line outside the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham shortly. EU proposals for a carbon credit system. We're going to examine what such a horrifying suggestion might involve. And I'm going to be joined by actor James Murray. You might know him from playing Prince Andrew in megadrama The Crown. But he's a passionate advocate for our waterways. He'll be joining me in the studio to explain why we could all make smarter decisions when buying our Christmas salmon. That's all coming up after a look at the latest news.
A very good morning to you. Just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Thousands of nurses are striking for the second time in under a week. It's staff in England, Northern Ireland and Wales who've walked off the job in a dispute over pay and conditions. The Royal College of Nursing has warned the action could go on for 6 months unless an agreement can be reached. The union